Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to the Urban Network podcast. I'm your host, Hewitt Pagenstecher. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Halie Meckley, who's the Director of Restoration and Historical Preservation at the Cascade Geographic Society. And she's also been a longtime tour guide of the Shanghai Tunnels. Halie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Well, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience volunteering for the Cascade Geographic Society, which is the organization that runs the Shanghai Tunnels tours, and your experience as a tour guide?
Yes. So I first went on a tour of the Shanghai Tunnels about 20 years ago. That's how I first became a volunteer. After that tour, I was completely hooked on the history, everything that it represented. So I started helping out with the tours themselves, as well as doing some work parties down there, cleaning stuff up, digging stuff out, and then helping on some of the other projects as well. The past 5 years now, I've been an actual guide for the tours themselves.
So I'm curious, what were the original purposes of the Shanghai Tunnels, or what do you think they were originally built for, and how were they used?
Well, the tunnels were built over a period of time, starting around 1860s, slowly connected together. There were many purposes of the tunnels, but they were designed with the intention of Shanghaiing in mind.
So, okay, they were designed with that intention in mind. Can you tell people who don't know what is Shanghaiing?
So Shanghaiing is the abduction of men to sell them to sea captains as slave labor aboard the ships. So here in Portland, this happened worldwide, everywhere. Shanghaiing was going on. In Portland, they had this underground network to facilitate everything. They constructed holding cells into the basements, so they could abduct men out of the saloons, out of the opium dens. They take them into the underground and lock them up, keep them down there until one of the ship captains was leaving, needed an extra man or two for a crew, haul them out to the waterfront, sell them, and then they had that extra labor that they needed.
Wow, so were they really built with that? Like, was that like on paper the reason why they were being built, or did they have like a front that they were using them for like cargo transportation for ships or anything like that?
Yeah, there was a front. It was, according to city documentation, the underground was built for legitimate purposes. So that the cargo from the ships could be brought from the waterfront to the base, directly to the basements of the buildings. That way they could avoid going through the muddy, unpaved, stump-filled streets.
So how was it found out what these were actually used for? Like, how are we able to determine that that's like, historically accurate, that they were used for Shanghaiing?
So that was listed as the original reason in the official documentation of them being built. But there is other documentation within the city of the purposes and the uses of what was happening down there. The founder of the Cascade Geographic Society, the curator, Michael P. Jones, also spent 60 plus years interviewing people. A lot of those people had actually been Shanghaied themselves, or was the family members of someone who had been Shanghaied, descendants of the founders of the city who could corroborate what was actually happening at that time.
So he was a journalist in a way, as well as like a... Did he publish a lot of these interviews?
He did not get the chance to publish them. Michael passed away in March of 2020, very suddenly. So a lot of his research and writings were still in progress. He was working on publishing that, but it hadn't all come together yet. So none of it was published, but he was actively working on that.
And he spent his first part of his career exploring the Shanghai Tunnels himself, right?
Yes. So the first time he went into the tunnels was in 1958. He was 7 years old at that point. Found his way down there thanks to a stranger that he met in a hotel who offered to show him the underground.
I can imagine as a child that being so fascinating to like just all of a sudden discover this web of tunnels. What do the tunnels look like underneath the city? Like, can you describe like how much space they cover, how integral or how complex they are, or if that's even accessible information?
So originally, once everything had been connected, and this was, again, it was built over a period of time. As a building was built, the underground was built with it, and then things were pieced together. But once it was all connected, it covered over 5.5 square miles of downtown Portland. So it went from the waterfront as far west as 23rd Avenue, from the train station all the way down to the Ross Island Bridge. So pretty much all of what is now downtown Portland had a section of underground beneath it. Most of that is no longer connected together because things have been blocked off or filled in. Tunnels going under the streets get filled in by the city because if a big truck sits on top of them, they will actually collapse. So important reasons to block things off.
And also probably because maybe new construction requires underground, like new piping and things like that.
So new construction going in changes things. A lot of earthquake proofing happening to the buildings because they really didn't plan for that when they built these buildings in the 1880s. So there is a lot of necessary things happening, but it does block things off. So a lot of what exists of the underground now is just single basements. And people refer to it as the Shanghai Tunnels. That does create a misconception in people's minds. They think it's all meandering, wandering tunnels that you're going to be winding your way through. Mm-hmm. The underground was actually comprised of interconnected basements. So you have the basement of a building connected to another basement. Brick archways connected those together. There were tunnels. Those tunnels ran under the streets or underneath the alleyways, so they were in between the buildings. So most of the actual tunnels that people think about, you can't actually get into, unfortunately, anymore.
I mean, it's possible that maybe there's a few entryways to the tunnels still. So I know that you used to tour out of the Hobo's restaurant, which has been like closed down. How many more known or estimated entryways to the tunnels are there?
I honestly have no idea how many there are. A lot of them are through the businesses themselves. So you'd have to get into a business and find out if they have a basement and if they still have access to that basement anymore. So there could be hundreds of entrances to the underground still left.
Are they like pretty blatantly clear entranceways in the basements, or are they hidden sometimes?
They can be hidden sometimes. It can be a little more difficult to find them, but most of the time it's just going to be look like just an entrance to the basement. And a lot of times when you get down there, it's going to look like it is just a basement. So people look at it and don't understand that, yes, at one point that was part of the underground network. It is and was a basement, but it did connect to it and it was part of it at one point.
I'm curious, and this isn't a question that I sent you ahead of time, but can you tell me about the experience of someone who is Shanghaied, from being in that initial bar that they were in to working for a sea captain, and what their experience was like in the tunnels in between?
So a man goes into a saloon, into a bar, goes in, maybe he's going to have a drink. Standing there. So saloons during this time, 1880s, men did not sit in the saloons or even at the bar itself. There was maybe minimal seating back away from the bar, but they actually stood right there at the counter itself. that was actually intentional, meant to keep the men standing there drinking. They can get men drinking, the more they can get them to drink, the drunker they can get them. If everyone's drunk, nobody's going to notice anything that's happening. You're not going to notice if a man suddenly disappears. To help facilitate that, they would actually put a trough at the base of the bar. So one thing that's going to take you away from drinking is if you need to use the facilities. So that trough men would just be standing there chugging, and then they could relieve themselves in the trough, wipe their hands on a towel hanging on a rack halfway in between, and then just keep drinking their beer. So nobody's walking away, nobody's really looking around. Everyone's just drinking. But then maybe somebody comes up to a man, taps him on the shoulder, starts getting really friendly, chatting with him, hey, can I buy you another drink? They chat for a bit, take him over to the side, more drinks. Maybe they've drugged the drinks, started putting some what they called knockout drops into there. Lure them away from the bar, because back away from the bar there were trap doors in the floor. So position a man above that trap door. When everything's ready, the bartender would pull a lever behind the bar. The man would fall through down into the underground. There would be men in the underground working with the Shanghaier. They'd be ready, waiting. They'd grab the man who fell through. They'd haul him off, and they'd lock him up in a holding cell. So down in the dark, possibly passed out, unconscious at that time, maybe just incredibly, incredibly drunk, wake up in the dark. No idea what's going on. Have no clue where they are, what time it is, what day it is.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, they may have no clue how long they've actually been down there. They might have kept those men drugged so that they weren't making any noises, so that nobody up above would hear anything. If they didn't keep the men drugged, they would make sure to threaten them. Any noise they'd made, they'd go in and they'd beat the men up, make sure that they stayed quiet. So then they'd keep them in those cells for however long they needed to. Could be a few hours, could be maybe a day or two, until a ship was ready to leave port. Captain would put in an order with a Shanghaier saying, I need one man to round out my crew. So we'd go to his cells, drug the men in there, pull one of them out, haul him through the tunnels and out to the waterfront. They'd load him onto the ship, still completely drugged, very heavily drugged, because he had to make it all the way out across the Columbia River Bar near Astoria. Because once they crossed the Columbia River Bar, there was really nowhere to go. You're in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
So stay drugged until they get out there. It was about 13 to 24 hours on board the ship before they woke up.
And then there must have been situations where people were like trying to escape, or maybe resisting working as a slave for these captains, I would guess.
Yes. So martial law prevailed on the ships. The captain of the ship was law. What he said went. Mm-hmm. Sailors really didn't have any rights until the Seamen's Act in the 1920s, which didn't necessarily do that much to help them anyways. But once they got across the Columbia River Bar into the ocean, they would hand the Shanghai man a contract. They would say, you sign this or we're throwing you overboard. So really his chances were sign the contract and be forced labor on that ship for the duration of the voyage. Could be 6 months, could be 3 years.
And there's no pro bono lawyers on the ship.
There's no
this.
lawyers. There's
Okay.
There's no help. Chances are you are the only Shanghai man on the ship, mm-hmm. Because they didn't want the Shanghai men to be able to band together and mutiny and take over.
Yeah.
The rest of the men were just going along with whatever was happening. The rest of the crew was, and yeah.
Wow, only one Shanghai man per ship.
It could be possibly up to 5, but that was the limit. Once you go over that, it's going to be too many to be able to band together. Usually it was about 1 or 2, though.
And the saloons were connected with the captains of the ship. Was that lucrative for the saloons? Were they paid to
The saloons, yeah, the owners of the saloons were paid off by the Shanghaiers to help them get the men drunk, to slip the knockout drinks drops into their drinks. So yeah, the saloons were paid off, the opium dens were paid off, the gambling dens were paid off. Everyone was making money off of this.
Well, where did the opium and gambling dens come into play?
Really any place of vice that was serving alcohol or, had drugs going on, where men would be slightly incapacitated or not really paying attention to their surroundings, served as a place to Shanghai men. Mm-hmm. Anywhere there were men available was a place to abduct men from.
Okay, yeah, so there are just additional locations.
To Shanghai out of.
What are the biggest mysteries surrounding the Shanghai Tunnels today?
I would say for us, for the Cascade Geographic Society, we don't really see it as a mystery. Mm-hmm. If you read stuff online, on the internet, you're going to see a lot of questions coming up. What was this really for? We have Michael P. Jones, the founder and curator of the Cascade Geographic Society. We have his 60-plus years worth of interviews, of research, digging through archives, exploration of the underground to go off of. So all of that really tells us what was happening down there, shows us what was going on. Other people aren't looking at that research. They don't have the firsthand interviews. Mm-hmm. They haven't gone and dug through the archives. So it's not just you can pick up a book and read everything that happened about this. It wasn't documented in that way. It's not the history that the city likes.
Well, there's the primary source, Michael P. Jones. So people will say that's just one guy, he could have been making it all, that type of thing.
So they're looking at, we can't find this information, therefore it's questionable, it's not true.
And they want to have a more pleasant history.
They want a nicer history of the city.
Yeah.
They want, if it is going to be true, they want it to be better documented. They want it to be easier to find. And it isn't. It's not out there easily accessible. Mm-hmm. So we don't see it really as a big mystery of things down there. That doesn't mean there aren't questions. There are definitely questions. What individual spaces were used for? Who were the people who were part of this? All those historical questions. And that's not to say that we have answers to any of them. There are definitely things that Michael did not have the answers to. It was an ongoing research process and probably always will be.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about where we are right now. We're in the Museum of Shanghai Tunnels. Tell me what you have on site here, and is that were they artifacts that were found in the tunnels themselves?
Yes. So the museum here houses hundreds of the artifacts that Michael and our volunteers have found in the underground over the years. Say hundreds of artifacts here, but this actually is just a small portion of what has been collected in the underground. From various different spaces. They all represent different aspects of what was happening down there. So we do have some of the opium pipes, because there were opium dens in the underground. We have logging tools, we have the harpoons, the fishing tools, probably coming from the different men who were shanghaied. When they were locked up in those cells, they would take everything from them.
And so this is closed right now. Do you have plans to reopen this museum?
Yes, we are in the process of finding people, volunteers, to be able to staff the museum so that people can come in and at least take a look at the artifacts. And hopefully that will be happening soon here.
And if someone was watching or listening to this interested in volunteering, how would they get a hold of the Cascade Geographic Society?
They could go to our website, the CascadeGeographicSociety.com. There's information there, our email addresses, our mailing address. Reach out to us through there, and when we have any volunteer opportunities available, we get in contact with people.
This question's more just for fun, but I'm curious if there's any stories about hauntings in the Shanghai Tunnels. I feel like I saw some stuff online about people claiming experience some paranormal activity. Are there any stories that you've heard or experienced firsthand about hauntings or anything like that in the Shanghai Tunnels?
There are a lot of stories about paranormal occurrences, hauntings in the underground. One of the tours we used to do was a ghost tour, where we talk about very specific events and historical ghosts down the underground. We've had a lot of the Travel Channel, History Channel, paranormal ghost shows coming through. But after spending enough time down there, 12 years about at this point, you start to get different feelings down there. And with a history like this, where it's dark, where it's traumatic, where people have been abducted and sold, I feel like it leaves something behind, whether that's individual spirits, whether that's just the history leaving its mark behind. I can't say.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there is something down there. There are things happening, whether it's just lights turning off on me when I'm down there by myself. You hear somebody call out your name from another space, there's nobody else down there.
That is spooky. But I'm still excited to check out the tunnels. There's an entrance around here.
Yes.
And we're gonna go, us and Juan, who's helping us out, we're gonna go check out the tunnels after this interview.
Yes, we'll go take a look and see if anything happens today.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, so we just have a couple more questions. So what's the state of the Shanghai Tunnels today, would you say? And is there any way people can support the Cascade Geographic Society?
The state of it, as far as our tours go, we had previously, before the pandemic, what was going to be three separate tour spaces. We are, unfortunately, due to changes in business ownership, building ownership, we are down to one space at this point, which is the one directly below our museum. That space still needs some restoration and some reconstruction to be opened up, which we're hoping to have completed here soon. As far as state of the tunnels in general, most of it's going to be just single basements, and you'd have to access it directly through a business with business permission, of course. But yeah, for assistance, we are at this point taking donations in any amount. That can be accessed through our website as well, Cascade Geographic Society. We also offer virtual tours. If you wanted to see the underground, experience a little bit of it before we're able to reopen to in-person tours, we do have a pre-recorded video with a live guide. So you get to see the space we previously went through, which was under hobos. So that's available. Tickets through that can be accessed through our Shanghai Tunnel website, which is portlandtunnels.com.
Excellent. Well, Halie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day and for having this conversation with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Urban Network Podcast. For more information on local professional networking events, go to urbannetwork.biz.